you're putting together a home studio, you can begin with just a few items. Here's my list of the essentials, everything you need to start making music. I'm also going to reveal the one piece of music gear that has made the biggest impact in my studio setup. First, you'll need a computer. I use a 2018 MacBook Pro. It's got a 2.7 gigahertz i7 processor, 16 gigabytes of memory, and 2 terabytes solid state drive. But you really don't need the latest and greatest. If you get a computer with an i5 processor and 8 gigabytes of memory, you're off to a really great start. It is a digital audio workstation, or DAW, like Ableton or Logic. A DAW lets you record multiple tracks, instruments, and then mix and arrange them into a song. It's gonna be the center of your music workstation. You can wait. A good set of headphones goes a long way. I use the Biodynamic DT770 Pro headphones. They cost about $150 and sound incredible. A MIDI keyboard is gonna make things easier and more expressive. Now, I get this question a lot, so let me clarify. Most MIDI keyboards are controllers only, meaning they don't make any sounds on their own. You connect them by USB to your computer, and they send signals to your software, which then generates the sounds which you hear through your speakers. This is actually a good thing because you'll be able to add more sounds through software instruments later, and there are some amazing software instruments out there. Up next, if you're a vocalist or a guitarist, or you just need to get some sort of external sound into your computer, you're gonna need an audio interface. I use the Focusrite 2i4. It lets me connect a microphone, an electric guitar, or a hardware synthesizer, and works with my DAW to get those sounds into my computer. The way you do this is by connecting your audio interface to your computer. Next, in your DAW, select the audio interface as the input and output device. To connect a microphone, plug it into the audio interface. Once you've done that, you can start recording directly into your DAW. Now, I use the Shure SM7B mic with my audio interface. Audio-Technica makes some great affordable condenser microphones as well. There are a few USB microphones out there which allow you to record sounds without an audio interface. Got your audio interface, now you're really gonna want speakers. Let's talk about studio monitors. I'm using the PreSonus Aris 4.5s, which are small monitors for a really great price. If you're on a budget, I highly recommend this setup. I paired them with the PreSonus subwoofer, the Tembler T8. Studio monitors let you hear your sound with as little coloration as possible. This means you're getting a more neutral sound that will sound pretty good on different speakers. That's really the purpose of studio monitors.
Let's get to the topic at hand. I'm going to answer the question, what is the best DAW? The best DAW is the one that makes you the most productive and gives you the smoothest, most efficient workflow. So depending on what you're trying to get out of the DAW, whether you're a producer, you're a mix engineer, you need to spend a little bit of time with each of the DAWs. Most of them these days have trials, fully functional trials, so I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that.
Number 10, a clean, organized, and beautiful interface. All right, number 2, a killer set of plugins. All right, number 8, updates. Since the release of 10, us Logic users have enjoyed roughly about 3 updates a year. Pretty awesome. It's fairly consistent. And those updates aren't just like a couple bug fixes. I mean, Google the release notes for Logic Pro, and you will see hundreds, if not thousands, of bug fixes and workflow advancements. Okay, number 7, a huge amount of great sounding instruments. Love it. Okay, number 6, fantastic editing features. Number 5, demo projects. In case you've been looking at this cover and kind of wondering what's going on here, this is not a project that I've worked on or recorded or anything. This is the included project for you to examine and enjoy in Logic. Number 4, key commands. Logic probably has the best set of key commands out of any DAW that I've ever experienced. Number 3, drummer. I am convinced that drummer is one of the greatest advancements in audio technology since Melodyne. Drummer provides us with an AI drummer who can play either acoustic sounding drums or electronic sounding drums, such as like EDM and hip hop. And especially with the acoustic drums, they sound very realistic and they sound great. And apparently the samples were recorded by Bob Clearmountain himself. And the number one reason that I think you should consider buying Logic based on everything else that I've just told you is that Logic is $200 all in, nothing left out, nothing for you to have to pay for later.
Disabled tracks has to be one of my favorite features in Cubase. As a composer that uses the orchestra a lot, I am required to use stupid amounts of instruments in my music. As you can see here, we have violins, all sorts of brass, woodwinds, percussion, and then you've got all of your hybrid hits and synthesizers, pianos, guitars, drums. It's all there. And I think my track count is nearly 500. Yes, my last track is 497. Now, that's a lot of tracks, and it requires a bit of a supercomputer in a lot of ways. Now, my computer is quite reasonable. I have a large amount of RAM to be able to hold all of these instruments at once. I have 128 gigs. RAM's not really the issue. The CPU is the thing that I find is my biggest struggle as a composer. Not only do all these instruments use a decent amount of CPU power, the plugins used to mix them are the things that require the most CPU power. And with 500 tracks, there's a lot of plugins going on. I have literally hundreds of plugins running inside this template. So this is a template that I load up every morning when I come into my studio, and it's all ready for me, ready to go. Now, disabled tracks help me immensely because it means I don't have to have every single instrument loaded into my computer's brain all at once. Now, number 2. Now, this one's a little bit nerdy, I will admit, but there is no way that I would be able to run this template of 500 tracks with hundreds of effects and instruments without one of Cubase's little features that's not talked about very often, but I'm a huge fan. Let's have a look. If you go to Studio Setup here, you will see that there is a little option called ASIO Guard, and you'll see that I have this on high. So what does ASIO Guard actually do? Well, as a composer, I need to be able to play instruments in real time as I go, which means I need a low amount of latency. I want to be able to play and hear in real time, which is so difficult when you're using such a big template with so many plugins. Now, the problem is the way that ASIO works is the lower your latency, the more processing power is required. This last one is just a great quality of life improvement when dealing with super large templates. Sometimes it's very easy to just scroll around like I'm doing here, trying to find what you need to find. I don't even have all of my folders open, by the way, so this can get even more hectic than what it is now. But Cubase has some pretty cool features built in to help navigate this mess, I guess you could say. And they have inbuilt visibility settings, and you can add configurations for which tracks or channels you want to see at any given time, and then save it as a preset.
In this video, we'll take a look at Ableton Live, specifically Ableton Live 10. So Ableton Live is a digital audio workstation, and if you're not familiar with that, it's basically an app where you can create, record, manipulate, and mix different sounds together. Stuff like drums, vocals, synths, guitars, bass lines, pianos, you name it, and then output all of them into a single stereo audio file. And that file can then be played on any playback device like a CDJ, your DJ software, or your smartphone. Now, Ableton Live is known for being a DAW that has dual workflows or dual views, known as Session View and Arrange View. Session View looks like a grid. The top has empty cells called clips that you can drag sounds onto, while the bottom has track controls like volume faders and knobs. You can launch any number of clips in a row to play simultaneously in a quantized manner, and they can keep on playing in a loop until you stop them. This makes Session View really good for performing on stage because it lets you play sounds on the fly while staying in time. So it lets you improvise with little risk as far as timing goes. It's also great for sketching out musical ideas quickly because you can just drag and drop sounds and everything plays in time. Now, apart from adding sounds like loops and samples onto clip slots, you can also add in MIDI clips. Now, MIDI clips contain MIDI data. Think of them as musical instructions, stuff like what notes to play and how hard to play those notes. And they trigger those notes in a synthesizer or drum plugin that you've added in a track in Session View. What's a plugin? Well, think of a plugin as an extension to a DAW. It can be anything from an effect, like an EQ, or an instrument like a piano, a synth, a drum machine, or a sampler. This is another reason why Session View is great for both live performances and sketching out ideas, because that means that you can create your own melodies, your own chords, bass lines, and even your own drum patterns using MIDI clips together with soft synths or drum plugins. Now, Arrangement View is the second workflow, and this is the more traditional interface. It's got a timeline that goes from left to right, and you place your audio and MIDI clips into your tracks. This is more for arranging your tunes since you're now able to place them within a definite time frame. And this is also commonly used in studio situations where you're recording or tracking in studio engineer parlance, instruments, musicians, and outboard MIDI gear. Now, Ableton Live comes with its own software instruments that let you create sounds, play melodies, and program drums. And these include the drum rack, which is an instrument that lets you add drum sounds and trigger them, Simpler, which is a sampler that lets you tweak, repitch, and manipulate a piece of audio, and Impulse, which is a drum sampler, but with extensive modulation options. It's got filters and a bunch of other controls. So Ableton Live can also be used with just about any MIDI controller out there thanks to its MIDI learn functionality, but there are some controllers that work with it straight out the box. Ableton's own Push 2 is a grid pad controller that's got a high-resolution OLED display and rotary encoders at the top, and other controllers from other manufacturers include Novation's Launchpad, which is also a grid, and the Akai APC40 Mark II. DAWs today are more powerful than ever, but Ableton Live sets itself apart thanks to its dual workflows and its ability to dig in deep thanks to the Max for Live platform that comes with Live Suite. Sure, it's pricey, but it really includes everything you need to make electronic dance music, whether you're going for house or techno music, hip-hop, and even experimental or ambient stuff.
Ableton Live, you can drag MIDI files directly into the arrangement window, which requires a few more things to do in FL Studio. You can quickly copy and paste MIDI and audio from one track to another, which again requires a few more things to do in FL Studio. You can easily duplicate bus and sub-buses. It can precisely duplicate things and delete things by portion, whereas in FL Studio, it requires you to cut the samples in both ends and select the part that you want to copy or delete. It has more control on its fades and crossfades, and it has a real-time view when you adjust the clip volume. It allows you to change multiple audio clip properties all at once, whereas in FL Studio, you still have to change them one by one. It can automatically fit drum loops or melody loops to the project tempo, whereas in FL Studio, you still have to do some manual stretching. It can easily automate third-party plugin parameters, which requires a few more clicks in FL Studio. It can hide and show automation tracks completely, whereas in FL Studio, you can only minimize. It can easily create sidechain, which requires a few more things to do in FL Studio. You can easily group tracks in Ableton Live, which will take some time to do in FL Studio. You can temporarily freeze a track to save some CPU resources. It has no limits when it comes to adding tracks, whereas in FL Studio, you're only limited to 500. You can warp audio in real time, whereas in FL Studio, you still have to send the signal to new time and send it back to the arrangement window after. It can pre-capture MIDI notes you just played without even hitting record. It records the sustain pedal, whereas in FL Studio, it only increases the note value. You can easily mute tracks in Ableton, while in FL Studio, it requires you to cut, click and drag over to the parts that you want to mute. Ableton Live restores the project exactly the way it was when it crashed. FL Studio cannot restore everything since its backup feature only works every 5 minutes or before risky operations, which means that you could lose 5 minutes worth of your work if it crashes.